and thank you all for being here. Now, I am going to need a little bit of audience participation today. First of all, I would like you just to, I have to do the mandatory from the stage, take a picture of everybody. Can I get a big wave from everybody? Come on, hands up in the air. Okay, that's my LinkedIn fodder for the rest of the day. So as I was introduced, the standard answer to everything in product is it depends. And decisions are core to all product work. And that's the only answer we ever give to those decisions, it seems. So I'm trying to improve that. I'm trying to give us a better way of working on that. Now, I love the fact that I'm looking out in this audience, and I can actually see 4 or 5 people I already know, not the organizers, people I know from previous events in Belgrade, one right in the middle that I can look straight at. It's like, there's my anchor person. Another one just over on the side. I love meeting people in every community. So I'm going to start out with a little bit more interaction, though. I've got a bunch of questions that we might get asked as a product person. Should we expand into a new segment? What's the answer? You've got it already. Most groups take at least 2 of these questions before they get that. Okay, so second question. Should we do some discovery on this? Now, some discovery coaches are probably saying, we absolutely should do. Well, it does depend. If you already have certainty, if there's no low risk, then maybe you don't need to. How about, should we sunset this product? It depends. Come on, keep the energy up. I'm going to be asking you questions throughout this talk. Otherwise, I won't fill 45 minutes. Should we solve this customer problem? It depends, absolutely. Yes, I've got to keep it general for the talk. I could name a particular problem, but I wouldn't then get it for your industry or whoever you are. So then here's my final question. Can we add this feature to win this deal? Someone see my slides? No? Well, maybe. It depends. And in fact, I'm going to stress this. Sometimes adding the feature to win the deal is the right thing to do. But I'll come back to that. So typically, when we answer a question as a product person, we answer with a simple answer of, it depends, or no. That's literally, you can have a lookup list of what answer you can give. A or B, nothing else is allowed. So why am I stood at the front? Well, a little introduction already. I'm a product coach, but that means I'm a player turned coach. I used to do product work. I used to lead product people. And I recognize that that coaching style of leadership is how I worked. And so I stepped out of that and started helping people across many companies, across many industries as a coach, typically working with leaders. And I boiled down what I did to this really fundamental thing of helping them think clearly, make decisions, take action, and drive impact or outcomes. And so that's my mission now. I've kind of boiled it down to that's what I do. And that's why I'm here speaking to you as a product coach who is trying to help product people do more of that. You might notice on your page at the top right-hand corner, there is a URL. If anyone would like, there was a book mentioned. If anyone would like to follow along, they can sign up there to either the mailing list or the Early Readers Club. You'll get a little bit of a taste for it through this talk. Because funnily enough, the book is called It Depends, because it's answering that decision-making question. And here's the secret of product management. Product management and Russian dolls have something in common. Russian dolls are Russian dolls all the way up and down. Product management is decisions all the way up and down. Should we implement this feature? Should we do this discovery? What's our strategy? That's a decision that then informs what's our roadmap. What's our roadmap then informs of, well, what should we do next on the backlog? Or should we do discovery? Or what should we do discovery on? And then the discovery you do, and the answers you gain from that inform, should I change my roadmap? Should I change my strategy, etc.? So it goes up and down in a set of decisions. But making product decisions is hard. really hard. Because fundamentally, it depends on the context. And that's why I call them context-driven decisions. The reason we say it depends is the context is the important thing. What market are we in? What do our customers care about? What's happening in the world? Apologies. In fact, too many product people are stuck in just the delivery mode, just building stuff that they've been told what to do. But actually, if we're not taking that bigger macro view of what's happening in the world, we're not making an informed set of choices. We're not, therefore, able to make good decisions. And the reality is you've probably never been taught how to make a decision. Just think about it. Did anyone teach you how to make a decision? They're probably just at this point in your life, because you're not children anymore, assume you've made a few, you're not dead, so you must be all right at doing it. And that seems to be pretty much the tacit decision or kind of judgment that people have got about decision making. But let's be honest, you're not all like multi-billionaires, so maybe there were some better decisions you could have made. Now, I'm not a multi-billionaire either. Let's point this out. I've come to thinking about decision making also later in my life, and thinking about how could I have made better decisions. And that's the reality. Like, we made a lot, probably made a lot of suboptimal decisions, and now we're expected to take that skill that we've never really learned how to do and apply it in our businesses to hopefully drive millions and millions of revenue, or maybe waste millions and millions. You know, I can hold my hand up. I have wasted 15 million euros on one product. That was not a great decision. In fact, it wasn't one decision. It was a sequence of decisions, and it was also a lack of a decision. Like, at some point, I should have looked at it and said, time to kill it. But I didn't. So when I'm breaking down or boiling down decision making, I get to a fairly simple model. That there are three key parts to decision making: getting to the decision, making the decision, and implementing the decision. There aren't many people who talk about decision making. In the product world, there are maybe two other people predominantly, although I did see an interesting post by Itamar Gilad yesterday about it. I'm going to have to give Itamar a bit of grief because he's a good friend and he's going after my space. In all honesty, it's some good content. I'm going to read it myself and it'll probably inform some of my writing. The two other main people you might hear about are a guy called Martin Erickson, one of the founders of Mind the Product, and a lady called Annie Dukes, who is from the west coast of the US, is a former poker player. She talks about thinking in bets. And I absolutely agree. We should think about a lot of the things we do in product as bets. It's gambling. We haven't got a guaranteed outcome. We're playing the odds. She talks about discover, discuss, and decide as her three stages of decision making. Which is great, but it misses a fundamental part to me. Getting to the decision, discover and discuss, absolutely. There's a lot of work that goes in there. In fact, probably most of the work is getting to the decision. Making is the easy bit. But implementing is also key and important. Think about it. If someone walks out of the room and does something different, then the real decision was something different. Bruce McCarthy tells a great story along these lines of a C-suite team that agreed on 4 OKRs. That's great. 4 was probably too many, but they agreed on 4 OKRs. They have agreement, they have alignments. Then the CTO walked out the room, went to the whiteboard, wrote them all on the board with his team there, and then crossed out 2 of them and said, yeah, these are the 4 OKRs, but we're going to ignore these 2. So the reality was there were only 2 OKRs. That was the real decision. People have changed the decision with their feet by taking action a different way. So to me, implementing the decision is just as important as the nominal decision that gets made in the room. And I'm boiling that down to 14 core principles for making strong decisions and a bunch of supporting practices. Some of you may have heard of tools and techniques like PR FAQs, the Amazon press release and frequently asked questions. It's a great short document that can help you think about what decision you're going to make, what course of action you're going to take. Actually, I was talking to someone who was ex of Amazon yesterday, or the day before, and they said, it used to be a great thing. Now it's become so much like theatre. They're not really using them in the same way to think through the decisions in many parts of Amazon. So maybe it doesn't work everywhere. Maybe it's not the panacea, the perfect solution. So there are many practices, but none of them, I think, are prescriptive and absolutely must have. OKRs is a great way of setting goals, but they don't work everywhere. You might use NCTs instead, and yes, I can do the alphabet spaghetti for about an hour here if I want to, but I'll stop throwing acronyms at you. So you're going to get exposed to 4 of the draft principles in the rest of today's talk, because 14 felt like a little bit too much in one talk, and 3 felt like not quite enough for 45 minutes. So the question is, what does it depend on? And this is not an exhaustive list when I show some of the thoughts. And I'm also going to get some audience participation going and ask you what it depends on. That might fill an extra 5 minutes. So should we expand into a new segment? I said it depends, but what does it depend on? That's a tip for you to answer questions. By the way, I've done more discovery interviews than any of you. I can be quiet for longer than any of you. So just play the game. So what does it depend on? Should we expand into a segment? What do you want to achieve? Any other ideas? Cost benefit. Yeah, are we going to get money back for what we invest? Does it make financial sense? I know talking about numbers in a product audience can be controversial. When I started product work, I had a $300 million product portfolio and full P&L responsibility. That was product management 15 years ago, maybe 16 years ago. How much do we know about them? Absolutely. Who are we targeting? Yeah, I mean, are we credible in that space? In fact, let's give you some ones. Have we exhausted our current audience? You know, too often, there's this classic one, and in fact, I was talking to Dragana about this last night, almost. She's talking about establishing a business in the US. And my first question is, why? Have you already exhausted your current market? It's like, you've got a local market that's far easier to get hold of and far easier to work with, where you can probably get much higher kind of profitability, and you're going to go off over here. Like the classic example everyone in every business wants to do is like, let's go and conquer the US because they're the biggest market in the world. But actually, often it doesn't make sense because you might not be credible there. Why, if you turn up, are you credible compared to the local audience, the local provider that does the same thing? Does your product fit the new segment? Like, you've got something, are you going to go sell it to someone else? Does it do anything for them? Like, because I used a geographical segment a second ago, but it could be a different market or whatever other sort of segmentation you want to use. I don't know, taking a women's health product and trying to sell it to men. Probably not going to be very successful. How big is the opportunity? The cost benefit? It's like, if it's not big enough, why are we wasting our time? One of my old friends had this simple rule in his business. If it's not a $10 million business, we don't want to hear about it. Every new opportunity had to be a minimum of a $10 million opportunity, because otherwise it was just a distraction to the senior leadership team. They wanted to work on big chunks of work and make decisions about big things, because otherwise they were just spreading their bets too thin. So here's my next question. Should we do some discovery on this? What does that depend on? Do we already have any insight? Yeah? What are the consequences if we fail? That's a risk-based question, absolutely. What about someone over here? Come on, I've had one brave soul that wasn't an organizer so far, so. Okay, I'm gonna be put less pressure on. What do we already know? It's like, you don't need to rediscover stuff that you already know. I know it's controversial. Some people say, I'm not doing product right if I'm not doing discovery. Product discovery is there for one reason: risk. If you don't know things, if you don't have confidence, basically, it's anything to do with risk. Like, is it feasible? Is it viable? Is it valuable? And is it, which one have I missed? Usable, there we go. Is it, if any of those have a risk, and I think Robin Peschel likes to add ethical as well into that list. If I've got risk on those, then I'm going to do some discovery. And that discovery might be some qualitative stuff by going and talking to people. That might be all it needs. Sometimes it might be running an experiment. Sometimes it might actually be building a basic prototype of the product. These are all forms of experiments that we do to de-risk things. Because that's all discovery is about. In fact, sometimes the best thing you can do is change that language. The word discovery has become a bit of a black word, especially with your sales organization. They hear discovery and they think, oh, you're going to take 6 months to not deliver anything. Discovery should be an order of magnitude faster than building it, i.e. 10 times faster or 10 times cheaper. That's its point, is to de-risk it. The highest cost, highest risk way of checking that someone really wants it is to build it. And so what you're trying to do is just reduce that risk. Not eliminate the risk most of the time, just reduce it. That's your job as a product person, is to reduce risk. And I think it was Georgie Smallwood at Mind the Products last year. She said in her organization, they'd switched the language. They stopped talking about discovery and started talking about due diligence. Because they had a commercial organization that did a lot of mergers and acquisitions and contract stuff. And due diligence was their language for dealing with risk. And as soon as they talked about discovery as being due diligence for the product work, everyone was on board. We might ask the question, have we got the capacity? There's no point in saying, yes, we'll do this thing, or yes, we'll do this discovery, when we haven't actually got the capacity to do that with all the other commitments we have. What else would we not be able to do? It kind of comes to that same previous question. You can choose to do it, but what else are you not going to do? You have 6 people in your team, or whatever size team you've got. They can only do so much. And reality is, we try to squeeze more in, something will fall out, but it just won't be a planned fallout. It won't be the thing that shouldn't have got done. It'll be the thing that someone just forgot to do or didn't really want to do. And so you've got to make those conscious choices. Notice that's a decision that then is informing the next decision. Should we sunset this product? Well, where is it in its life cycle? If we're just growing, it's like, well, maybe it's not making tons of money yet, but we're starting to see it tip there. That's probably a bad time to sunset it because we're about to start and get the benefits. On the other hand, if it's on its tip down, thinking about the life cycle of a product, maybe it's time to kill it. Make that choice. Or maybe you can even choose to divest it. You can sell it to somebody else. I've done that with a number of products over the years where someone else could make money out of it. Someone said, if you need to go and have a smoke, you can do that during the break. Like, smoking, like, we barely have smokers in the UK, it seems, these days. I never hear the word smoking. But I remember a company that had divested its technology from Europe into China because it was still a hugely growing market in the smoking world, and it was the thing that sealed, when the papers came around, glued them together. It's like, we're just going to sell it to this Chinese company because we can't make money from it over here in Europe, but they can. So let's divest. And heck, we want to consider if it's still profitable. Does anyone remember the VW Beetle the first time around? Probably not old enough to have, yeah, you remember what the car is. You probably didn't buy one the first time around. Even I'm not that old enough. But someone drew a Boston Consulting Group matrix, a BCG matrix. And in the bottom corner, there's a thing called the dogs. And the standard sort of wisdom, if you've got a dog, is kill it. Put it down. Well, actually, we've reinvented that matrix a few times, and it's sometimes called pets now in that corner. Because sometimes you will keep something because it delivers something else. It's not just about market share. It's not just about profit. It's about the intangible benefits. The VW Beetle was iconic. It defined their brand. They regretted killing it ever since. They tried to bring it back. It was never quite the same. They learnt the lesson, though, and didn't kill the transporter. Unfortunately, it was never as iconic as the Beetle, but they kept it and they refined it over time instead. It was still making a small profit, but it delivered so many additional benefits that they kept it, or they should have kept it, for their brand. And that's sometimes the reason you do it. Like, there's other reasons. A friend who was in the CRM business, he once had a meeting with his senior leaders, and they put up this graphic on the wall that had a bubble for the revenue from every product in their business. And there was this small bubble in one corner for this old legacy product that everyone had been recommending we should kill this thing because it's end of life, it's really hard to maintain. And if you looked at the graphic, you thought, yeah, it makes sense. It's like 3% of our revenue, but it's about 10% of our engineering cost. But then he pressed a button, and he'd been working with a guy called David McCandless, who's a famous infographics specialist. And it exploded. And there was this big bubble that took up about 80% of the screen all of a sudden. He said, it might not directly generate it, but 80% of our revenue through all the other products depends on it. We are in that client. We are in that business. We rely on a connection to this original product in all of these other deals. If we don't have it, we lose all of that. So understanding its role in the portfolio is also important. How does it help and support other things that you're doing? You might ask if it's cannibalizing things. Cannibalizing means, is it taking away sales from other parts of your portfolio? You know, if Apple kept every single version of the iPhone in their portfolio, it would cannibalize massively because the 10 would still be taking away sales from the 16. But now they have probably the 15 and the 16 in the range only. Maybe they've still got the 14. I forget what numbers they're up to. They are limiting the cannibalization, but also giving options to lower-end markets or lower-cost options for people because they know that not everyone is going to spend the amount of a brand new whatever model. So they are allowing some cannibalization, but not ultimate cannibalization, and they're getting the economies of scale of a small number of products. We might ask, can we save it? We could also ask, should we solve this customer problem? Well, is it strategically aligned? Does it fit in our portfolio? Does it make sense for us to go in this direction? Because if it doesn't, why are we even talking about it? Is now the right time? Doing an AI product right now, pretty much everyone's probably got one. They're kind of like treating like peanut butter. We'll spread some AI across everything and hope that it does something interesting. I remember doing augmented reality technology. We were doing it in automotive, so vehicle maintenance. And there were some awesome use cases that we had for it, but the technology just wasn't ready. And the technology not being ready meant that now wasn't the right time. We were spending a lot of money on the R part of R&D, the research part, but getting no benefit back, apart from maybe some brand positioning value. Our team wasn't big enough to be doing that. Instead, we needed to be focused on where are we creating value. Do we even understand the problem? Or do we already understand the problem? Like if we're thinking about doing discovery, if we already understand it, let's just get on with it. Do customers care enough to pay for it? Too often it's like, I've got a great idea, and people think the idea is 90% of the problem, or 90% of the work. The idea is like a dime a dozen. I have 100 ideas a day. I throw out 150. I need to find something that is an acute enough pain that customers will actually pay for it. Because if they won't, it's a waste of our time. There's only so many hours and so much time in the day that you can spend working on your product. And therefore you need to put it in the most high return place. And I'm not saying money is the ultimate decider. That's probably also worth saying. Sometimes that brand recognition is the important thing. Sometimes doing good in the world, if you're a social enterprise, there are different motivations. But what's the value you're going to capture? That's the important thing. Can we add this feature to win this deal? Again, do we need the money to survive? I know it is absolutely blasphemous in product world to say, the salesperson has turned up, we have to add this feature to win this enterprise deal. Well, you might need it. You might need to do it. If you're in B2B, depending on the shape of the industry, you might find that individual companies exert a large amount of power no matter what you do. I worked in automotive for a long time. There are only 20 car companies on the planet. Doesn't matter how many brands you see, there are 20 car companies. When BMW turn up and say, I love it, but I need this adding, you add it. Because you don't get the deal otherwise. When VW do the same, when Geely do the same, you add it. Because that's the nature of this shape of the industry. It's an oligopoly. And even when you're Continental, who I was, who's like second or third largest supplier in the industry, about as large as each of the car companies, you still say, yes, sir. You find a way to make it strategically aligned to make sure you can deliver that same capability to other people, but you do it. If you're in startup land, it's wonderful having a vision, knowing where you're going. This is our North Star that we're trying to achieve. If you don't survive to deliver that, then it's a waste of time. You need money to survive. Money is the fuel of business. And especially in the post-ZERP era, as we're now calling it, zero interest, whatever, basically where money was cheap up until about 2 years ago, you could get away with just doing growth at no cost, all of the costs. Product needs to be profitable these days. It needs to wash its own face. And there's a great model by a lady called Radhika Dutt in a book called Radical Product Thinking, where it's a 2x2 matrix. On one dimension, it is the vision fit, and the other dimension is survival. In the top corner, you've got ideal fit. It's going to help you survive, and it fits your vision. Perfect. Definitely going to do that one. Even if it wasn't next on your roadmap, you're going to do it because you're going to get paid for it, and it's taking you in the right direction. Win. Then you've got something down here, which is not vision fit, but helps your survival. It pays you the money you need to survive. That's called vision debt. A bit like tech debt. You're going to take some vision debt so that you can survive and ultimately deliver on the vision. Because if you're not here in a year's time, you're not going to deliver the vision anyway. And then the next corner in the top left where you've got good for the vision, not great for survival, that's called investing in the vision. If you've got the funds to do it, great. You won't always be able to do it. That's sometimes where you're ahead of the market. You know what is, or you have this vision of what's going to be valuable in the future, but the market's not quite ready for it, not quite taking it. But you've got to survive to be in business, to deliver that bigger value. Is it aligned with our vision and strategy? Heck yeah. We've got to know whether it's aligned. Otherwise, why are we doing it? The bigger question is, do you know what your strategy is? Do you know what your vision is? I go into a room with a load of product people very often to run a training course. And I ask that question at the start of the strategy module. And about 75 to 80% of the time, the answer is, no, I've got no idea. And often the senior leader of the product team, the director, VP, or whatever, is sat in the corner of the room and looks aghast. What do you mean you don't know our strategy? We've got this detailed deck that describes it all. You should all know it and be driving towards it. It's like, well, your job next week is to make sure they all know it then. Because if they don't know it, how can they make decisions that are informed by it? Will they pay extra for it? Goes back to the previous one. Like, if someone's asking for it, are they going to pay us for it, or are they just expecting it in the standard price? So again, that can be a nice thing. Let's increase profitability. Will they be a good reference customer? I often give a discount to someone so I can get a case study or something like that because they're a nice brand and I want them on my website. So my favorite case study customer at the moment is a company called Luna. They're one of the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchanges. It's quite nice to be able to say I work with a cryptocurrency exchange. I've worked with Ticketmaster. I've worked with so many different brands. Heck, I've got Microsoft on there as well that I've worked with. So I've got the big corporates, the kind of scale-ups, and I've got some startups. So it shows that breadth of people I work with. They give me good references. So the next person I'm talking to, we're a bit like those guys. Right. You helped them, you can probably help us. Or your product was valuable for them, it's probably valuable for us. And actually, we used to do this at Continental quite regularly. We would always, in the B2B enterprise space, we would do a soft launch. And our soft launch meant we'd take our product and we'd go to one early adopter customer before we took it to the market. And we'd have 6 months with them using it before we took it to the broader market. And then, imagine that early adopter customer was VW. We'd turn up at BMW in a sales meeting and they say, that's great, it looks awesome. Who else is using it? Oh, VW have been using it for the last 6 months and these are the benefits they've got. Another big German manufacturer, we're happy. They're getting good benefits. We want those benefits too. It's an easy sale. Oh, and you might have picked up there, that was a sales conversation. Sorry to sell you product, people, but you're in sales. If your product isn't successful commercially, your product isn't successful, therefore you're not successful. Now, I'm not saying you need to be in every single sales call or every single sales meeting, but you do need to enable the commercial process. So here we come to the first of my 14 principles. Understand the context of for your decision to inform and constrain. You are not free to make any decision you would ever want to make. There are constraints. There's a context that informs that choice. And you need to know what it is so that you can put yourself in that box. You might say, oh, you're constraining my creativity. So you know, most creatives they love constraints. Constraints force far more creative solutions. So then let's move on to another concept. Reversibility. Can you change your mind fundamentally? Who's heard of the Amazon concept of one-way and two-way doors? There's a few hands. So I'm gonna, because it's a small number and I've come across it, I'm gonna introduce what they are then. So a one-way door is an irreversible decision. It's so consequential and irreversible that basically you've got to take your time to think about it. Because if you make the wrong decision, it's virtually impossible to go back. Mergers and acquisitions are a great example here. VW killing the Beetle, a great example here. Basically, you just couldn't walk back from it. A two-way door, on the other hand, is one you can try, go through, and look around and say, I don't like the other side, I'm going to go back through this door and close it again and make a different one, a different choice. Because it's changeable, it's reversible. And this is how Jeff Bezos and Amazon think about decisions. Which type of decision? Is it a system 1, system 2 decision? Anyone who's familiar with agile sort of methodology might have come across Kinefin as well. Well, in Kinefin, a two-way door would be ones where you can where you'd use sense and respond type approaches, agile type approaches, whereas a one-way door would be a complicated decision where you've got to think about it, but by doing the analysis, you can actually get to a good answer. Like building a bridge is a one-way door, but you can do all the work up front to know how to build it correctly. But I think there's some middle doors. There's sticky doors. There's some doors where you come and you've got to push hard before you can open them. It's hard work. It's not as simple as, I'll go through, have a look, and come back out. Those are doors where there might be a lot of political resistance in the organization. Certain people have a vested interest. They don't want you to go a certain path. Or there might be locked doors. You think, oh, here's an option. You go and you try it, and you can't open it. Or even more so, it could be one you think is a two-way door. You go through it, you close it, and you think, oh, I don't like this. You come back, and it's been locked behind you. Something has changed in the world that means you can't go back. All those wet paint doors. The name is terrible, but it's the best I could come up with. Think about it. If you open a door that's got wet paint on it, it leaves a mark. You were the person who made that decision, good or bad. There's a political fallout in the long term. Like, oh, Phil, he's the one who made that really bad decision last year. We're not going to trust him this year. He's going to have to prove himself again to wash that paint off. And so most doors, I think, are actually in the middle. They're not truly one-way doors or two-way doors. There's a cost or an impact for any change. It's very rare that anything is truly 100% reversible or 100% irreversible. It's just a huge cost. Think about, is it Canva that Adobe were trying to acquire recently? I say recently, 2 years ago, and then finally it's not happening. The impact for the last 2 years on both organizations is huge. They have rolled it back, but the cost and the impact is massive. It's interesting because literally in the last 3 months, I've seen Canva suddenly start to do a load of new things. It's like they've been on hold, not changing their product because they think they're going to get acquired and they don't want to invest their thoughts in it. So here's another principle. Change your decisions if needed, but understand the impact. Make conscious choices. Who's got a directive boss? Who's got a hippo in their organization who walks in and says, do this, implement this feature? There's lots of smiles and laughs. So I'm guessing that's yes. Or at least they know the cliche. They're just not prepared to put the hand up because the boss might see them on camera. Okay, that's cool. We all know that that's generally not considered to be the best practice. On the other hand, there's also a lot of people go and ask for permission. Please, sir, can I do this, sir? Anything else, sir? That's also not great. We've got to find the sweet spot. And I look at this in this way. There is a zone of leverage, like how much value is this decision going to deliver? And there is a zone of empowerment, how much I'm allowed to do, what I'm empowered to deliver. You've probably all heard the Marty Kagan phrase, empowered product teams. Hint, it doesn't mean autonomous teams. It doesn't mean you get to do what the heck you want. You are empowered to solve a problem. If you read like beyond the title, that's what he says. So there's already decisions that have been made at the senior level to say, this is the box, the constraints you're working within. So you have an area of empowerment, an area of leverage where basically they're bigger or smaller decisions. And you're trying to find that sweet spot in the middle, where it's the high leverage, but also but where you're empowered to do it. There'll be times when actually you're too senior and you shouldn't be making this decision, or you're not the best, most capable person making the decision. Like if it's a design decision, a usability decision, and you're a product manager, stop trying to make that decision. Let the designer make it. If it's a technology decision, let the engineer make it. If it's more business-oriented, you make it. Sometimes you might have to pass it up to your leadership because you're not empowered to that level. If you are passing it up, though, you should always pass a recommendation. In fact, that often helps to stretch your zone of empowerment because they see that recommendation, and 90% of the time, if you literally voice it as, I recommend you do this, they'll 90% of the time just say, and you say then why as well, 90% of the time they'll say yes. And they say yes because they've got no better ideas. And you are the closest to the decision, to the information. You might not be empowered to make it, but they'll take your recommendation 90% of the time. And so recommending something can help expand your zone of empowerment because next time they'll just say, you can decide. Or after a couple of them, they'll start to trust you to decide. On the other hand, if you're passing it down, share the context. Too often it's like, oh, can you just decide this? And you've got all this knowledge about why it needs to be decided, but you haven't bothered to share it with them. Like, what are the constraints? We can't do X because it's something that there's a patent against. It's often something I've come across. And instead of passing that knowledge, that context to the decider, you used to assume that they're going to do all their own research, going to figure it all out, or just already know it. So making sure you pass the recommendation with the why and delegate with a context is super powerful as well. So that leads to another decision, a principle of make the highest leverage decisions that you're empowered to make. And on to my last one. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Shopify and eBay as companies. If I look at eBay, do you know which one they favor of a buyer or a seller? The buyer, yeah. What about Shopify? The seller. They have made a clear choice about which customer group or user group to favor. Now, it makes sense because eBay is a consumer-facing brand, and so consumers, buyers come to them, and the sellers are kind of almost a no-face. But they made the choice that if we look after the buyer, sellers will come because buyers will be there, and the buyers are the hard side of the network for them. On the other hand, for Shopify, you don't even know if you're on a Shopify site most of the time. The merchant is their real customer. They're the hard side of the network for them because they want a more professional sales setup, etc. So they look after them better. They have made a conscious choice that if they find themselves at a decision point where there is two choices, one that's better for the customer or for the seller, one that's better for the buyer, they know which decision to make. They don't have to think about it. They've had the debate up front and said, this is the way we think. And so they encode those in repeatable patterns. Martin Erickson calls these product principles. If anyone's read the Agile Manifesto, that's full of principles, this over that. It's about encoding those thought processes so that if you find yourself at that junction, then you have a decision to make. Instead of having that same debate again, all you have to do is say, this is our principle, we go that direction. And you make consistent decisions all the way up and down your organization. So that brings us back to just a reminder, we have to get to a decision, we have to make a decision, we have to implement a decision. You've seen 4 of those 14 product principles. They are the draft ones. I plan to publish the book in the middle of next year, so there's probably a lot that's going to change by then. And a bunch of supporting practices. So if anyone would be interested in joining the mailing list or joining the Early Readers Club, you can sign up there if you're interested. I'll leave that there just for a second. So I'll just leave you with that final thought of, let's go and make some better decisions.